It's just, I'm muted.
I would go back to the
Welcome, everyone. We will get started in another minute or so. If you would please keep yourselves on mute unless and until you have a question or you want to make a comment, that would be great. I am Dr. Regina Hopkins, and I will introduce my team in 1 second. Okay, for the CSDE team, I am joined by Amanda Pickett and Dr. Jessica Ocasio. And for our Region 2 Comprehensive Center partners in this work, I am joined by Dr. Meg Kevin. And in the background is Sterling. So if you would, just to let us know who's in the room, it would be great if you would just provide your name, title, district, or educational organization. Drop it in the chat and let us also know whether you participated in the coaching series. I also want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded because the webinars are posted on the CSDE's resources page as a tool for those who couldn't join us today. Next slide, please. So this slide contains our community agreements for this session, and it is the same list of community agreements that we've used for all of our encounters so far. Please take a minute to read our community agreements. They are intended to create a safe space for productive discourse. And again, a gentle reminder for you to use the language of the work, to discuss the work, and to, again, stay on mute unless you want to make a comment or have a question. Thank you. Next slide. The legislatively mandated submission date for your Increasing Educator Diversity Plans is fastly approaching. That date is March 15th. So this webinar, we will model Increasing Educator Diversity Plan development using the plan template available at resources for Increasing Educator Diversity Plan creation and implementation. And I will drop that link in the chat. And for today's session outcomes, participants will understand how to develop quality goals, identify strategies to achieve those goals, and begin to consider the feasibility of achieving goals with the strategies selected.
Thank you, Regina. I'm going to get us moving into some of our content for the day. It has become some usual suspects in this space, so happy to see many of you back for the webinars to continue tuning in and working on this in your districts. So I wanted to kind of bring us back to help us think about goals and then selecting strategies in our plan. So when we're thinking about last session we were together, we were really working on what could be some potential goals after we looked at Brookside Story's root cause analysis. And I just want to take us back to think about that our goals, which are specific, are measurable, attainable, time-bound, they really do come from your district vision for this work, your strategic planning that you're doing around this work. And then we set these larger goals to drive our work. So our team met internally to prep for this session, and we looked at the Jamboards that you all helped us create in our last session around root causes and what could be some potential goals. And we started looking at our template, really trying to help build some exemplars and examples for all of you. And we're brainstorming kind of what could we put on this sample template. And what we determined as we looked at what came up in the Jamboard, this is just a screenshot of one of the Jamboards, and in our internal work group, putting together today's session, we are all very eager to find solutions. The commitment to this work, I think, is demonstrated by our eager solutions to some of our problems. But we want to make sure that we first set a clear target, which is really our goal. So like I said, in the Jamboard and our own internal prep, we noticed that we're quick to move towards strategies. So we want to make sure that all of those great ideas are ways that we can improve our process and our efforts. But we need to know, what are we actually trying to achieve, so we can be clear and assess how we're meeting that target and making progress. So setting a goal also assist with thinking of indicators of progress and the data that your team will need to be carefully monitoring. So you saw here, we went from strategies, and then you'll see this goal used later on today around setting the actual goal that we were working to fix here, is that educators of color will make up at least 30% of all those hired in the 2024-2027 school periods. We all came up with many amazing strategies, but again, getting us to think of the data and the outcomes we're looking to achieve. The goal that we came up with as a team was really looking at this measurable, time-bound goal. So as we move forward, we wanted to make sure that we also highlighted and shared some other valuable resources from the toolkit. On page 12, Regina mentioned the IED resources page on the talent website. I'm sure we're going to continuously make sure we drop that link in the chat. But again, encourage the use of the toolkit. This exists on page 12. This self-evaluation tool will assist your team in assessing your plan. It provides key questions to assist your team in ensuring that you're developing a strong, intentional, and comprehensive plan. So again, we would encourage you all to take a look at this tool before submission. And Regina, I'm passing it back to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate that. So as I mentioned, what we're going to do today is to use the information from the fictitious Brookside story, which is found in the guidebook, and we'll use that to model the Increasing Educator Diversity Plan template that you must use for your plan submission. As a reminder, for those of you who may not have read the Brookside story or have read it and forgotten bits of it, it is a fictitious story about a district where there's a third-year superintendent, Nia Mitchell. She has tasked the Brookside hiring and selection team with leading Brookside's effort to increase racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of the district. The district and community support for a racially diverse educator workforce is high in Brookside. Parents, school board members, school administrators, and educators, and community and business leaders are all on board. In this slide, it was important to capture and show you what Brookside's demographic data is. In addition to this data, which indicates an underrepresentation of teachers of color, the other thing that's important to know is that in year one of Superintendent Mitchell's tenure, there were only 5 educators of color in the entire district, herself and 4 other educators of color. However, during the 3 years of Superintendent Mitchell's tenure, the number of educators has tripled to 15. However, 5 of the 15 educators of color have recently announced that they will be leaving Brookside. So even though Brookside has attracted and hired educators of color, the district has been unable to sustain those educators in ways that support their retention. Looming questions for Superintendent Mitchell are: what conditions are necessary to ensure a racially diverse educator workforce? How can mindsets and skill sets be shifted to create and sustain those conditions? What hiring and selection processes and practices are most likely to increase Brookside's racial diversity? And what professional learning supports are necessary for all of those involved in the hiring and selection processes? Next slide, please, Amanda.
So actually, I'm going to switch our screen here.
Oh, right. To the templates.
Yes. the template, which we've seen some questions. So I want to acknowledge some folks have asked some questions in the chat. Thank you,
Okay.
Sterling. I know he is capturing those. We are working on some sample language, some exemplars, and a rubric. So this is going to be a chance now where you are going to see the template being used with Brookside's information as a sample for you all.
And I also see that there's a question regarding whether or not the SDE has determined target percentages for districts, and we have not. The point of the root cause analysis is for each district to look at its own data and to determine what the targets need to be and what the percentages need to be based on what their current demographic information reveals. Okay, so this slide is the cover slide for the new and admittedly often revised, but this is the last iteration of the tool. The Increasing Educator Diversity Plan template that we are asking you all to use. And you can see that it's pretty self-explanatory, and one of the reasons I will say that we've had some updates to the template is to reflect your expressed needs and concerns, particularly in terms of having a tool that allowed you to be able to view the content that you input and to be able to input a greater amount of content as you develop your plans. Amanda, can we go to the hiring selection tab? Meg, do you want to go?
I sure do. Thank you so much, Regina, for inviting me into the space. Thank you, everybody, for being here this afternoon. One other thing I did want to call attention to about the plan template, and I'm going to ask Amanda to hover over those like very subtle but very important little purple corners of the title boxes. Those little purple flags in the title boxes correspond to guiding questions that are drawn from some of the tools that we highlighted earlier, that sort of bright pinwheel pie chart thing, that gives you some indications of what a strong entry would look like under each of those categories. My eyesight isn't good enough to read it, nor can I see the full content of those boxes, but what you're asked to do, oh, there you go. Thanks, Amanda. You're helping out tremendously. So these are questions to ask yourself and your team as you go through the process of developing your plan, right? So for each goal, have you identified an individual person who owns that goal and manages progress towards its completion? You'll find those helpful hints and guiding questions on every category from goal through communication/engagement. And it's just that information appears elsewhere, right? It's in the toolkit, but it's doubled here to try to improve the efficiency of working through these columns as you're developing your plan. So my task today is really just to talk through row 6 of this tab, and you'll or of this sheet. You'll notice at the bottom that there's a separate sheet for each of recruitment, hiring and selection, and retention. The categories repeat themselves, right? It follows the same structure, but we've broken this out by activity type or by sort of overarching goal to just to spread out the text a little bit and organize your thinking. So starting with that goal that we co-developed following our last session and reflecting Brookside's intent to ensure that educators of color make up at least 30% of all of those hired in the period between 2024 and 2027, we began to brainstorm strategies, right? Amanda started us off talking about our interest in and deep inclination towards strategies. But before jumping there, we ensure that we have put a person, the president of the district teachers union, Juanita Achala, in charge of tracking that goal, and then begun to identify individual strategies that we think will move us in the direction. One of which was ensuring that we had a selection committee that included diverse representation across racial, linguistic, and cultural groups, as well as members of the community, for example, parents. We thought this would be a really important component to a plan that ensures that the teachers that are selected and ultimately hired into their position reflect a more diverse and compose a more diverse educator workforce. I will admit that this is very much reflecting your own, what might be your own moment. We're not able to fully attribute this work to one person because maybe that work remains incomplete, or the committee itself remains incomplete. Really an omission on our part. We've set a target date for the assembly of that committee by April 2024. And then in the latter half of that row, we've really begun to think through, like, how will we know when we're making progress toward this task? So we've identified a leader for this initiative, right? Then we will have someone named who owns this work. Committee members representing Brookside's various constituencies will have been identified, invited to, and regularly attended those meetings. Notice that this doesn't tell you how. There's not a lot of detail on the how, when, who, what. This is like indicators of progress are in some ways little mini goals, right? Like, how do we know we're on track? Have we identified the folks that we need to be part of this committee? And then on to resources, right? What people, time, money, and technology will be needed to achieve this goal of assembling this diverse selection committee. We know that recruitment will require broad email outreach as well as follow-up conversations. And the meetings themselves will require space, snacks, maybe childcare. But that sort of invites us to think about, like, what are the risks and mitigation associated with this work and with this task in particular, right? And especially when you are in this hypothetical situation, planning to or aiming to include a really diverse group of folks, not only racially, ethnically, and linguistically, but also in terms of role group, right? Parents. I'm a parent of young kids myself, and there's many things I can't get to because I don't have childcare, right? So maybe meetings are unintentionally scheduled at times that are inaccessible to certain participant groups, or might unintentionally exclude speakers of other languages if you don't have the appropriate interpretation resources there. And thinking about risk mitigation strategies, we could explore virtual meetings or interpretation services, and ensure that no individual member is asked or presupposed to alone represent their group, whatever identity sort of rises to the surface for them. And then finally, in thinking about communication and engagement, who needs to be consulted and engaged, we think we need that it's critical to establish clear goals and expectations for committee membership, including centrality of increasing educator diversity, ensuring that goals are articulated and circulated to the school building and administrators, as well as heads of the PTO and DEI committees, right? So we're thinking about a broad outreach strategy that gets beyond district administration into the community and loops in critical groups who are working on aligned efforts. So that's the walkthrough of this strategy. I'm going to pass it back to Regina, who's going to do a similar walkthrough of the following before we set you free to think a little bit about what this could look like in your home district or a Brookside analog.
Thank you, Meg. So I have the next row, and I will say that as part of our own exercise in doing this, what became clear is that even though there's a hiring and selection committee that Brookside has assembled, there is no hiring or talent person identified for that committee. So that was interesting. And so in terms of who I identified as the what is, would be training for hiring and selection committee members and building leadership to help build the cultural competency and the cultural responsiveness and cultural humility needed to address and mitigate bias in the hiring and selection processes, and to be able to sustain educators in ways intended to increase their retention. Because there is no talent person who is on the team, then the question became who would be best positioned and most likely best able to lead the cultural competency initiative. And so Rhonda Jackson is the person who on the team was selected because she is a person who recently completed a Courageous Conversations. The information is that she did that training the summer before. She is a white middle-aged woman who has behaved in ways when the committee has met that makes her an ally for communities of color. And so she is the person in the absence of a talent person or anyone else who appears to have the most experience and at least the knowledge base for being able to identify and build out what that strategy would look like. By when is January 2025. We just kind of picked an arbitrary date, but it needed to be give them enough time to actually be able to accomplish the task. And because this is likely to involve them having to hire at least one contractor to do training for the committee members as well as the building and district leaders, then resources are going to be required, which means that there's going to have to be a board approval for funding through finance committee. There may be a need for technology resources. And so there's going to have to be an appropriation allocation to support that effort, and that may take time. In terms of risks and mitigation, Brookside is arguably unique in that in this fictitious district, there appears to be broad and strong community and district support for the initiative, but that is not always the case. And that is one of the takeaways that we learned from doing a coaching series. And so it will be important to make sure that and to plan for possible resistance or tepid support from the board or folks in the district, current educators, or even family, students, or community members in the district, and ways to mitigate the possibility for opposition or challenge is to ensure that there's a positive and strong communication strategy to foster understanding, cooperation, and mutually respectful discourse and exchange, so that all who are in the community have an opportunity to understand the importance of the initiative, and also have an opportunity to have their voices heard. In terms of community engagement, all affected and interested community members, including students, should have an opportunity to have their voices heard to foster community member alignment around the shared goal of increasing the racial diversity in the district of Brookside. So a positive communication strategy would be needed. And while it was, it sounds like it may have been a succinct process for us, it took us some time to go through the template and to decide what the goal was. We went back and forth, and we had to continue to be mindful about the differences between goals and strategies. So we are as engaged and invested in this process as you are, in an effort to try to provide you with information that will support your success in building out your plans. And Amanda will stop sharing.
Trying to find my unmute button. This is what happens when I'm trying to
You're
switch
multitasking.
screens here. I also want to acknowledge some folks have made some questions in the chat regarding the template on our page and the guiding questions. We are working on a fix for that. We will make sure that you get that information for you all. There we go. All right, if I can have a thumbs up if you're actually seeing our slide here up. I have the right screen up. Thank you, Meg. All right. So now we want to give you all a chance to talk together about what this might look like, what you might experience with your teams. So our friends are going to put you in the magical land of breakout rooms. We are going to keep you in these breakout rooms. Of course, you won't be able to solve all of the world's problems. So you're only going to be in this space for about 5 to 8 minutes. So just a little bit of time to have some conversation with your colleagues to think about using your district experience. If you were setting this goal of increasing and ensuring that 30% of those hired in your district are candidates of color, what strategies are you all putting on your plans? What are you brainstorming and thinking? How have you thought about who would own this strategy? Who's leading this work in your districts? What challenges are you meeting there? What resources are required to do this work? And what are some of those potential risks that you're mitigating? Our hope is that you can have some discussion in your breakout spaces to be thinking about how you would use this template. We encourage you to download the template. Sounds like many of you have already. And you can use a template to help you guide this conversation. But in this conversation, hear from each other about the work. And then also it's a chance for you all to think about what resources would be helpful for all of you. So my friend from West Ed is going to put you all in some breakout spaces. Your goal in this space is to really have a discussion about the work that you all are doing. So what strategies you're brainstorming and potentially selecting around ensuring you're hiring more folks of color. Who's doing this work, what resources are required, and what are some of those risks. Again, you're going to have about 5 or so minutes to do this. And then we're going to come back and debrief and share some additional resources. So Sterling, we should be good to go unless there's any questions, concerns, thoughts for folks before we put you into Zoom land. All right. Welcoming you all back from your Zoom breakouts. Some folks are still engaging in some chat about 15 seconds before they join us. Beautiful. Everybody should be popping in. Just going to ask you again to remute yourselves. Making up my own words now. And Regina, if you want to lead our...
Thank you, Amanda. So, what challenged you in this activity, or what strategies did you come up with in your breakout session that anyone would like to share with the group?
Any reflections? Some of you must have been having some good dialogue. You weren't coming back too quickly. So
This is Stacy McKim from Middletown Public Schools, and I had the opportunity to partner with Kevin from Region 13. And just born out of our conversation, there was an opportunity which he would like for us to collaborate in some capacity, share ideas, some similar challenges. So just, just banding together so we don't have 169 different plans.
Stacy, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome that you had an opportunity to collaborate. I think some continued opportunities for districts to come together on this work sounds like a great idea and thought.
And Amanda, I'm Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
So I'll just basically reinforce what Stacy said. We're next door neighbors. We're neighboring school districts, but we're somewhat different in demographics and ethnic and racial makeup. So, we have some work to do and we have some challenges. We are not a diverse community. So, a lot of the things that I have taken a look at in the Brookside plan and basically, in the guidebook and some of the toolkit and some of those others are a little bit of a challenge for us because, we're not a diverse community. We don't have a diverse population. So that's going to be a challenge for us. And that's why I'm looking forward to working with Stacy in the future on this.
Thank you, Kevin and Stacy. That is a great idea. So that you can brainstorm with and learn from each other.
I saw a brave question in the chat around legal advice, around not attaching hiring percentage to the goals. I'm not sure if there's an official SDE response to that.
There is not at this time.
So can I just add something to that? Because this is what we talked about in our breakout room. There are a few things, and this is just reflection, just thought. I'm not expecting an answer today. So we talked a lot about numbers, and I know the goals are supposed to be specific, but legally we are concerned about specifically saying we're going to hire this number of such, right? That is like antithetical to what discrimination is about. So I just need to, it doesn't align to being non-discriminatory. And then we talked about the definition of diverse, right? Because we're hearing a lot about teachers of color, and some people identify as of color, some people identify as other, right? Like whatever. It's also, from my understanding, and I am not an attorney, illegal to ask certain questions of, or frowned upon if it's not illegal, to ask certain questions. And why we support the work, because we recognize the importance of having a diverse workforce of staff, and not just educators, right? Just throughout the school and the district. Those are some things that we were discussing and pondering on, because if our goal is not as specific as that, the bounce back, but there's reasons why it may not be as specific as that.
Thank you. And we will consult with our legal office to provide an answer that addresses the concerns that you've raised. I can tell you that it is acceptable to ask as part of the hiring and selection process on a voluntary basis, information about how applicants identify their racial, ethnic identity. You can't make it voluntary, and it should be, any information that they provide should be kept separate from the actual hiring and selection process, so that it needs to be a completely separate process. But as part of an effort to increase educator diversity, there has to be some demographic data that you collect in order to be able to determine who your educators are. It has to be voluntary.
So So Regina, help me to understand this, and I understand that part about the voluntary piece. I've seen it. So, but in the hiring and selecting process, right? If these candidates are not already part of our working force, collecting that information separately, how? I guess is just, and again, I'm not looking for you to have the answer, Regina. I'm just trying to make sense of it.
If I may I pop in a little bit?
Please.
So, you know, if you're collecting the voluntary demographic data through your application process, you do want to be careful as far as quote unquote, as Regina said, sharing it with the hiring team. That should stay in HR, but you're not asking the questions, but you're getting the information on the application side, as opposed to once somebody's employed. So you would be able to theoretically, if you already asked the question now in your application, although clearly it's voluntary, so therefore it would only be for the respondents that gave the information. You would be able to have some baseline data that said, say for the sake of argument, from January 1 to January 1, of those who identified, X number of our applicants identified as the following, and then after we implemented our program, X number of people identified as the following. So you could theoretically get data that way, but definitely not allowed to ask the question about it. You certainly can't. I mean, that can't be part of the interview.
Exactly right. Thank you so much.
Absolutely not. That wasn't what I was at all suggesting, and you're correct. But there is a legitimate reason for asking the question, and there have to be procedural safeguards, and people have to have the ability and the right to opt out.
Right.
And not have there be any adverse or negative inference drawn against them because they're unwilling to provide any kind of demographic information.
Correct.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Regina. Thank you, Harry.
Yep.
Regina, there was a couple things that I also wanted to note about your original question, Tanya. Thank you for bringing some thought-provoking ideas and thoughts to the group. One is, I know you mentioned the racial component, but this is a plan around increasing the cultural, linguistic, and racial diversity of our workforce. So encouraging looking at, you know, your multilingual workforce population and things like that as well. And then I also saw a question in the chat about paras. And I think this is really about a thoughtful, holistic plan around how we're building a diverse workforce holistically, but also creating pipelines and opportunities for growth. So definitely there is a role for, you know, how are we diversifying your paras in the plan? But it's not just about diversifying just one particular role. It's really about your entire workforce and building capacity.
Yes, as mentioned. Thank you, Amanda.
And I also see some questions concerning the requirement or the recommendation that your boards of education approve the plan. Thank you, Charmaine and Hannah. And the reason for that is the legislation doesn't specifically require that. However, the legislation is clear that the boards have to submit it. And so implied and presumed in that is that if it's submitted presumably on behalf of the board, that even if district leadership is responsible for preparing the plan, that the board has been given an opportunity to review and approve it. Because the board is going to have to support implementation of it. Any other questions or?
I think there was a hand up earlier. I don't know if there was still a question, but I know that there was a hand up earlier that I had seen. The extension process is in the FAQ document as well. All of those questions are on that document with the process and the email address. So again, we'll put in the chat the IED resources website so you can have all of that information. The other things that I was just going to kind of note in our kind of wrap up of this sample creating strategies and a plan is really ensuring, I think when we looked at the two examples that Meg and Regina walked us through, and some of the discussion here and the questions that you all are asking is really stressing the importance of engaging multiple perspectives and various folks in your community to be part of what you are creating. So this isn't just something that's created in a vacuum and then presented all of a sudden. And the piece around those multiple perspectives truly can help you build out a more thoughtful and intentional plan. Those perspectives can give us really good insight in things we might want to make sure that we include. The other pieces around data collection and ensuring that we're creating a comprehensive plan around not just hiring educators of color and diversifying our workforce, but really sustaining them as well. Regina or Meg or any of my team members, any other things we wanted to make sure we noted in our debrief of that?
Thank you, Amanda. I know that there's questions about the sample plan or the example of a strong Increasing Educator Diversity Plan, as well as the review and feedback tool. We are in the process of working on those things, and as soon as they are available, they will be posted. And I will try to email them directly to folks who have provided their information on the webinar or who have asked questions and any of the through the SDE IEP plan email address, which is the address to make any request if you need an extension of time as a result of the fact that your Board of Education or whatever your governing body is will not be able to meet to review and approve your plan before the March 15th deadline.
I have one question for you. I saw in the chat that this has gone back and forth in terms of the new template, and then somebody mentioned that the template that was sent out today doesn't have the little purple corners with the guiding questions. And I went through the chat. I don't believe there was a final answer. Is that template going to be available with the guiding questions in another location?
We actually had a discussion about that while you all were in breakout rooms. And so we're going to post that. It's not going to change the format of the template, but it will have the ability to access the guiding questions in it.
And so that'll be on the website in the same location, I assume.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll just swap that plan for the one that's currently there. They'll look the same, but this one will have the functionality of being able to see the guiding questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Jessica, any thoughts?
I'll just referring back to the toolkit that was discussed earlier, where Amanda just discussed the progress monitoring and self-evaluation tool. There are guiding questions there to help you kind of self-evaluate how you're moving in the planning of your in the development, of your plan. And it has those key questions, which are going to be similar questions that you will find in the template with those purple tabs. So we're going to work on posting the updated template. Again, formatting doesn't change, just has the questions in there, but we recommend that you go back to that toolkit and page 12, I believe it is, to look back at those key questions that you would end up finding in the updated plan template.
One other question. Thank you so much, Jessica, Regina, and Amanda. It's been very helpful. My other question is about after the plan has been submitted and approved. I believe I read somewhere or heard somewhere, either in a formal webinar or in the reading, that these plans, once approved, will be posted. Is that accurate? Be posted on our website? Will the state be, like, I was wondering, like, am I accurate in saying that? Was there some talk about that, or am I like losing it?
Yes, so Public Act 23-167, Section 10 mandates that approved plans be posted on the Board of Education's website, as well as on the CSDE's website.
Okay. And that's what I thought. And then my second question on that, thank you. I'm glad that I was like with it when I saw that. And then my second question is, when you're thinking about this work and it being like a living document, I know it says like we're tied to some dates. What does that mean? If it's posted, it's been approved like this and it's posted, but we're recognizing as we're doing our progress monitoring, like, hey, there are some changes we need to make because that actually we didn't think about when we created this report. What does it mean for like amendments and such?
So that's a great question. As you know, the legislation came out quickly at the end of last legislative year, and there was a quick deadline. So it doesn't really address what happens after the initial submission of the plan. It makes perfect sense, and we want you to be able to have the flexibility to do progress monitoring and learn from what you are implementing to help you make determinations about what changes may be necessary. And so at a minimum, it would make sense to, as you update your plan or amend your plans based on kind of the real-time implementation of your strategies to meet your goals, to just make sure that that version of your plan is updated on the website. But currently there is not any legislative guidance beyond the initial first year, which is to submit plans by March 15th. And if revisions are required, those revisions should be submitted by May 15th.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, final thoughts, concerns? Let me just say before we close out that I know that this has been a, shall we say, trying process. And we acknowledge that, and we are doing our best to try to support what has not been an easy process for us. And I know that it's not an easy process for many of you, particularly in some of the smaller districts where there are just not the personnel to do all the things that need to be done, or even in any district where that's the case. And so we appreciate your attention and your commitment to doing this in a way that will be successful, and then to also do what's necessary to ensure that it's implemented and that you are able to achieve the goals that you set for yourselves. So thank you for your persistence and your willingness to join us on this journey. And with that, I will wish you all a wonderful afternoon, and thank you for being part of this webinar. And I dropped in the chat the email address, so please feel free to use it to send any questions or concerns that you may have about this process.